To summarize, the respiratory system is responsible for supplying oxygen to the body and removing carbon dioxide. The process begins with inhalation, where air enters the nose, travels through the pharynx, larynx, trachea, and bronchi, and finally reaches the alveoli, where gas exchange happens. The diaphragm and rib muscles control the movement of air in and out of the lungs, and the brainstem regulates the rate of breathing based on the body's needs. Hemoglobin in the blood helps transport oxygen throughout the body, and carbon dioxide is carried back to the lungs to be exhaled. Understanding the anatomy and physiology of the respiratory system is crucial for diagnosing and treating respiratory disorders. The respiratory system is responsible for the exchange of gases between the body and the environment. This involves bringing in oxygen, O2, for the body's cells and removing carbon dioxide, CO2, a waste product of metabolism. It's a continuous cycle, and every part of the system plays an important role in keeping this process running smoothly. Let's break down the anatomy of the respiratory system. The respiratory tract can be divided into upper and lower respiratory structures. Here's an overview of how the system works. Nose and nasal cavity. Air enters through the nostrils, where it's filtered, humidified, and warmed by the nasal passages. Pharynx. The throat, which is a common passage for both air leading to the lungs and food leading to the digestive system. Larynx. Also known as the voice box, it houses the vocal cords and serves as the gateway to the trachea. The larynx also protects the airway during swallowing. Trachea. A windpipe that carries air from the larynx into the lungs. Bronchi. The trachea divides into two bronchi, left and right, which then branch out into smaller tubes called bronchioles within the lungs. Lungs. The main organs of respiration located in the chest cavity. The lungs contain millions of tiny air sacs called alveoli, where gas exchange occurs. Alveoli. These tiny air sacs are the primary site of oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange between the air and the blood. Now, let's discuss how the physiology of breathing works, step by step. Breathing is essentially a mechanical process of moving air in and out of the lungs. Inhalation, inspiration. When we breathe in, the diaphragm, a large muscle beneath the lungs, contracts and moves downward, increasing the volume of the chest cavity. This creates a vacuum, causing air to rush into the lungs. Exhalation, expiration. When we breathe out, the diaphragm relaxes and moves upward, and the rib muscles also relax. This decreases the volume of the chest cavity, pushing air out of the lungs. This cycle is controlled by the brainstem, specifically the medulla oblongata and pons, which monitor the levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the blood. One of the most critical functions of the respiratory system is the gas exchange that takes place in the alveoli. Here's how it works. Oxygen from the air we breathe diffuses from the alveoli into the blood in the capillaries surrounding them. Carbon dioxide, which is carried by the blood from the tissues, diffuses from the blood into the alveoli to be exhaled. This exchange occurs because of the difference in partial pressures of gases. Oxygen moves from an area of high concentration in the alveoli to an area of low concentration in the blood, and carbon dioxide moves in the opposite direction. Once oxygen enters the blood, it's picked up by hemoglobin, a protein found in red blood cells. Hemoglobin carries the oxygen throughout the body. When the blood reaches the tissues, oxygen is released from hemoglobin, and carbon dioxide, a waste product of metabolism, is picked up. The blood then returns to the lungs, where carbon dioxide is released from the blood and exhaled. Breathing is not just about moving air in and out, it's tightly controlled. The medulla oblongata in the brainstem is responsible for regulating the rate and depth of breathing, primarily by monitoring the levels of carbon dioxide in the blood. If carbon dioxide levels rise, the medulla signals the body to breathe faster to get rid of it. The chemoreceptors in the aorta and carotid arteries also monitor oxygen levels and send signals to adjust breathing rate if oxygen levels drop. Let's quickly cover some common respiratory disorders that can affect the system. Asthma, a chronic condition where the airways become inflamed and narrowed, making it difficult to breathe. It often causes wheezing and shortness of breath. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, a progressive lung disease that includes conditions like emphysema and chronic bronchitis, making breathing harder over time. Pneumonia, an infection that inflames the alveoli, causing fluid or pus to fill the air sacs, leading to breathing difficulties. Pulmonary embolism, a blockage in one of the pulmonary arteries usually caused by a blood clot, which can obstruct blood flow to the lungs. To summarize, the respiratory system is responsible for supplying oxygen to the body and removing carbon dioxide. The process begins with inhalation, where air enters the nose, travels through the pharynx, larynx, trachea, and bronchi, and finally reaches the alveoli, where gas exchange happens. The diaphragm and rib muscles control the movement of air in and out of the lungs, and the brainstem regulates the rate of breathing based on the body's needs. Hemoglobin in the blood helps transport oxygen throughout the body, and carbon dioxide is carried back to the lungs to be exhaled. Understanding the anatomy and physiology of the respiratory system is crucial for diagnosing and treating respiratory disorders.